Hello, team. How's it going? It's Friday. It's Food for Thought Friday, and I actually haven't been in a hot seat for a few weeks. I am at Jeff HQ in the office here today, looking a little bit sweaty. Jules has just put me through my paces. We're filming for our challenge, which is epic. Hopefully, there are 1 or 2 challenge peeps popping on here. We're kind of kicking off Diabetes Month and talking about insulin and blood sugar control and diabetes. And chatting a few things about that. It was a question that's come up a few times from our Jeff Life members, our challengers, our one-on-one clients. So we've done something sort of similar in the past, but I just want to dive into it a little bit deeper today. Give you a little bit of background, talk you through kind of blood sugar control, what diabetes is, and how we can maybe influence it. So it might not appeal to you right now, but blood sugar management is always something we do need to keep front of mind for whatever reason, whether it's preventing long-term chronic disease, or even just controlling your hunger, trying to get into better shape, improve your body composition. A lot of these actually are influenced by blood glucose control, just down the line that can manifest as sort of adverse sort of diabetes longer term and things like that. So pop any questions into the comments as we go through here today. Let me know who's all here, how you guys are doing, and if there's anything you want sort of more info on as well. Just stick it in here. So we've got Pat. Good to have me back. Thanks, Pat. It's good to be back. I felt like I haven't shared a few tips in depth like this for a while, so it's nice to actually dive into it. Ava, hello, how's it going? Gavin's here as well. How's it, Gavin? Hopefully you guys have a cup of tea or something. Maybe you're nibbling on your lunch, and we'll just have a few minutes to chat through things and give you a little bit of food for thought. That's why it's called Food for Thought Friday. So I'm going to jump straight into it. So got a little something lined up for you guys over here, and we'll go into a few slides. If I can bring it up on my screen. There it is. Okay, so firstly, I want to talk to you just about the background of blood glucose control. Essentially, there's this, you can see the little yellow block on the right there. There's this band. Whenever you go for like a little finger prick test or a fasted blood glucose, or you go and have some pathology done, we're checking what your glucose levels are like, and your body wants to maintain a certain level of homeostasis. So it's a broad enough range that's kind of an acceptable level for your blood sugar or blood glucose levels to be, and that's between 4 and 8 millimoles per liter. The further away from a meal you are, the lower that is, because your body's taken any glucose from what you've eaten and stuck it into your cells where you store it, or it's used it for energy production. The closer you are to the meal, the higher it is, because your body's just broken down. It might just even be from fruit or vegetables or even some protein or anything. And that might just increase slightly. So closer to a meal, your blood glucose levels will be a little bit higher. The further away you move, the lower it should be. And that's also why we normally do a fasted test to get a good understanding of what's happening in terms of your risk of developing or presenting with insulin sensitivity issues. But that's sort of the range. Fasted between sort of 4, 5, maybe 6. After a meal, it might be from 5 to 8. If it's outside of that, we'll just ask ourselves kind of what's going on here. But what happens, you eat something, it doesn't have to be a muffin like I've depicted there, but any sort of food, and your body picks up that there's new glucose, new sugar, carbohydrates. Those are all interchangeable terms that I'll use here. And that little organ there is your pancreas, and it secretes the hormone called insulin, and it's insulin's job to move that glucose from your blood into your liver, where it stores glucose, or into your muscles, where it also stores it. So those are your 2 primary places that you store it, and that's what those 2 pictures are. The little sort of long spindly thing there at the top is a muscle fiber, so you store some glucose there, and then you store some in your liver. Now, you can see kind of that picture in the bottom left there, sort of dazed and dizzy. When your blood levels start dropping a little bit lower, and I'll talk about some of the symptoms around these things, but that's a common one. You feel a little dizzy, feel very hungry, maybe lightheaded. Now your body says, hey, we're below this range between 4 and 8. I need a little bit more glucose. You need it in your blood because that's what you use for your brain to function, for muscles to produce energy, to move, for your heart to pump. It's a readily available source of fuel. So when it's very low, you don't have that. And your body's sending these messages. So it goes and knocks on the door of the pancreas there again, and it releases a different hormone called glucagon. And that then goes to the liver and says, hey, that glucose, that carbohydrate that you've got stored, I need some of it so that you can regulate your blood sugar levels between 4 and 8. So there's kind of this balance between, if it's a little bit high, the pancreas helps to bring it down with insulin. And if it's a little bit low, the pancreas jumps in again and releases glucagon and keeps it 4 to 8. Okay, so that's kind of normal. That's maintaining a good level of homeostasis, which is the term for your body just keeping things where it sort of wants to be. Your body likes that. It doesn't like to be at extremes one way or another. So brief introduction to blood glucose control, a lot more that goes into that as well. But now, in the healthy person, now your body's going to release insulin. So the image that's up at the top there, and that insulin acts on that little blue dot, which is, or the little blue dot is insulin. It acts on a little purple kind of whatever shape that is glucose. And it goes and attaches to a cell that's called an insulin receptor. And it tells the cell to open up the channels that let glucose into the body. So insulin's like a key, really. So it floats around, it gets released from where it's stored in the pancreas, goes to your liver or goes to the muscle, and it's like the key that goes into that receptor, opens the door, the channel for that glucose to come in, right? And that's really, in a nutshell, how insulin works. Now, when we look at how it might not work, and in the case where we've got insulin issues, either through type 1 or type 2 diabetes, type 1, your body or your pancreas isn't producing insulin. Okay, so that little blue dot, the little key, there's none of it, right? It's genetic. It's normally present from birth or very early on in life. There's nothing you're going to change about that. You don't have the key. So the glucose is just floating around the blood. That's why we see very high levels of blood glucose, because the little channels can't open and you can't go and store it into your liver and into your muscles. So type 1 diabetics are the type that will take insulin at pharmacological doses, so an injection of them because your body can't produce it, so that that glucose can move into your cells. We want to do that because glucose at high levels can be quite toxic. It damages tissue, and it damages eyes and nerves. It's very toxic to the body when it gets very high. So it can lead to very adverse outcomes in uncontrolled diabetes, even at the extreme level, death. So it's something that has to be critically controlled, and that's the role of insulin. So that's what it's doing there. It's making that little glucose kind of channel open and move in. Type 1, you just don't produce it. Now, type 2 is the extreme level of we might look at it like a spectrum, where it starts from like poor insulin sensitivity. So that's the first sign that you sort of start looking for, raised blood glucose, all the way down to the level of possibly becoming an insulin dependent type 2 diabetic. Right. So there's a spectrum of these, from someone who doesn't manage their sugar levels very well. So the insulin receptors, maybe the sensitivity issue is there, through to, starting to, being type 2 diabetic and taking things that either help you produce more insulin or improve the sensitivity, to the ultimate end of the spectrum where you have to take medical insulin as well. But in type 2 diabetes, it can impact sort of both sides. And it starts normally with reduced insulin sensitivity, because that little receptor on the cell, so the keyhole, is maybe a little bit small for your key to fit in, if you use that as an analogy. So now your body sees that there's more glucose and it starts producing more insulin. It says, I need to get this glucose into the liver or into my cells, so I need more insulin. That's why you might do a blood test and see a raised insulin level, and that's sort of the first sign that something's going amiss here. It starts producing more because those little receptors aren't accepting it. And your glucose levels are going up, and your insulin levels are going up, and the longer that goes on for and the more chronic it is, the further down the spectrum towards full full-blown diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and then insulin-dependent diabetes things become. Right, so those are kind of the stages of it. You've got healthy, type 1, which is completely separate because it's genetic. It's something you're born with. You're not going to change it. You're just going to treat it and manage it. But type 2 is the lifestyle one, because that's what we can impact. There are a lot of things that play a role, but we are able to manage it, control it, reduce our risk for that. And that's something that I want us to all be aware of in terms of our lifestyle, our exercise, our sleep, our nutrition, all of those sorts of things. Right. And these are the different aspects that influence it. Now, these are, for the most part, controllable. I'll get to that in a second. But type 2 diabetes is influenced by these different elements. I'll start up at 12 o'clock on our screen there. The first one being obesity. Possibly the most, the strongest link towards diabetes is body weight and excess levels of fat. So obesity, a strong driver of poor insulin sensitivity and risk of developing diabetes. Smoking increases the risk of developing diabetes. As we age, it does, because naturally our insulin sensitivity drops. Hypertension, which is high blood pressure, increases your risk. Having a sedentary lifestyle, it's just not moving, not exercising, increases the risk. Stress plays intricately into this as well. Genetics, if it's in the family history, you might be more predisposed to it. The way that the body functions might just increase your risk. And naturally, a poor diet contributes possibly to a lot of these, or a lot of these also contribute to a poor diet. But because we're talking about blood glucose and sugar control, naturally diet's going to be at the heart of that for us. All right. So a couple of symptoms of insulin resistance, things to kind of look out for. The first we'll talk about here is thirst. As you can see the little man holding up his glass of water there. Excessive thirst can be a sign of it, because your body picks up high levels of blood sugar. And to that, your body says, I need to dilute this. So your thirst kicks in and says, go drink some water, because I need to dilute the strong glucose that's in my blood now. So that's why thirst is one of them. Frequent urination, the impact on kidneys, water loss and water retention, function of the kidneys. So frequent urination can be a symptom of insulin resistance. Cravings and hunger, because your blood sugar levels are all over the show. Insulin's high, blood glucose levels are high and low, and there's very little control to that. Excessive cravings and hunger can be a symptom of these. It's unlikely one of these on their own are going to be, but having a combination of these would suggest at least having a blood test done. Excessive fatigue, tingling in your hands and feet, that's particularly more prevalent further down the line, because raised glucose levels can damage nerve cells, and in uncontrolled diabetics that becomes an issue as well. And the nerves that go to your extremities get damaged, and that's what that tingling sort of feeling is. And then darkening skin, either under the arm or in the groin. So those are some common symptoms of insulin resistance. Okay, so can I beat it? I mean, having a look at each of these and our little Pac-Man of lifestyle control there, I think we could argue that every one of these aspects can be beaten or managed or controlled. I'll start with the least likely, which is our genetics. We can't change our genetics, but just because someone in your family tree has diabetes, it doesn't mean that you are going to get it. You must always remember that our genetics is always only part of the puzzle, and it interacts with our environment and our lifestyle. So the triggers that cause our genes to be expressed are important aspects, and all of the other things in our circle here will influence how that genetic script is written. So we can't control our genetics, but we can, to a certain extent, manage how this is expressed in the body. And I think all of the other elements here are going to play a role. If the genetics are there and all of these lifestyle factors are amiss, the risk is just that much higher. Okay, so stress, can we beat it? Yes. If you've got blood sugar control issues, I think focusing on some of these and asking yourself the question of perhaps which one of them is my low-hanging fruit? Which one can I focus on? Is stress a daily issue? I've got everything else under wraps possibly, but let me work on that and see every 2-3 months, checking what your fasting glucose and insulin levels are like. And if I'm managing my stress a little bit better, either by what I'm exposed to, which is sometimes a little bit harder because we can't always change life at home or our job or things like that as easily, but what am I doing to manage it? Because I know that it can increase my risk of these chronic diseases. A sedentary life, everyone who's watching here, hopefully that's one that we can tick. You're here with us, you're exercising, you're training hard. If you're not, you're keeping active. If you're injured for prolonged periods, your insulin sensitivity can also reduce over quite an acute amount of time. So it's important that you keep active. It doesn't mean that you have to be going all out all the time. We're just trying to avoid sedentary times that build up together. Right. So sometimes as well, a little 30-minute session doesn't always overcome some of the downside of being sedentary. So if you sat around all day, you have a desk job, make sure you're moving. Set yourself those daily step goals so that you can get them up and you can overcome that. Hypertension, a lot of these aspects do impact that. So obviously we can do things about having a high blood pressure. We can either control it medically or we can do the things that improve it. So the other aspects here where it might be weight or stress or smoking or alcohol or whatever it is that are going to impact high blood pressure, we can manage it. Age, we can't necessarily change, obviously, but we can age gracefully or we can age quite quickly. And our lifestyle is going to impact that as well. Smoking, we can control that. Hopefully, not many of us are smokers. One of the best things we can do for our health when we've got blood sugar control issues or risk of diabetes is quit on that. Manage a good body weight, so avoiding obesity. What do we do to avoid it? How are we don't have to be in the prime shape of our lives, but do we have enough muscle mass? Because that's our metabolically active tissue, and that can overcome not necessarily just being overweight, but it gives us a little bit of cushion. So we can still be overweight, but carry a good amount of functional mass, of strength. But it's more sort of obesity, a BMI above 30, 35, and now we start seeing the risk of these things really increase. And then poor diet, which is the bit that we're going to just put a little bit more detail into here. So what do I mean by poor diet? Well, it's, one little image hasn't loaded there. Man kicking down the door is what's behind the grey towel. But we build a pyramid from the bottom up. And this is one thing we get asked is, how do I change my diet? What do I need to do to improve blood sugar management, to reverse insulin sensitivity issues, reverse diabetes? And it can be done depending on your commitment to it and your sort of consistency and sustainability of it. Now, the most important part of any pyramid is the base. So right down at the bottom there is the most important thing to focus on. If you go for a blood test and your blood sugar levels are out of whack, or if you've got a high risk because any of those things on our Pac-Man wheel are high, you've got a family history, you're concerned about it, what do I need to focus on? The first thing is the amount of food that you eat. Don't get clever with all the other things in my pyramid here until you get your portions right and your total energy intake right. If you're overeating, that's going to be the strongest driver of risk for diabetes. If you're in a calorie excess chronically, meaning you're putting on weight, or you're overweight, or you've picked up weight recently, that is going to impact your blood sugar levels, your insulin sensitivity. Get your portions right, get the total amount of food right so that you're eating the right amount. I promise you that's going to give you the biggest bang for buck in terms of getting a good blood sugar control and reducing your risk. Once you've got that right, okay, now we start looking at a few other things. What else can we do here? Either to mitigate risk, or I'm eating the right amount, but now maybe what my food's made up of or the proportions of different things aren't quite right. So what do I need to do? Tick that first base off first, then ask yourself, am I eating enough plants? So I've said plant-based, but that doesn't mean vegetarian or vegan or whatever it is. It just means, is most of the food that you're eating from plants? If you're looking at your plate is at least half of it plants. It might be more than that. But if you aren't eating enough plants, you're not getting enough fiber, you're not getting enough vitamins and minerals and all the different things that might influence how your body metabolizes carbohydrates. It might influence your weight change goals. If you aren't, and I think one of the most successful things that we see from any type of diet that's out there, whether it's Mediterranean or low fat or low carb or whatever it is, if there isn't enough plants in it, I can almost guarantee we're not going to get the long-term results that we want to see. So get your portions right and your total food intake right. Then, am I getting enough plants? Okay, if you're not, work a bit harder. If it's not in every single meal, you've got some work to do. So get some plants in it. It could be fruit, it could be nuts, it could be vegetables, whatever the case is. Make sure that we've got sufficient of it. Then you can break down what these meals are kind of made of in terms of the combination of them and what's actually appearing on your plate. And there's a little mantra here that anyone who's kind of spent enough time with me in this space with Jeff will hear me talking about: the magic combination of protein, fiber, and fat. Those are the three things that have to be in every meal. Right? There needs to be a source of protein, there needs to be a source of fiber, and there needs to be a source of fat. So those things combined will give you the best blood glucose response to a meal. So that means you might produce a little less insulin. So the chronic effect of that's a little less. It's going to give your body more time to metabolize, store, absorb, whatever the case is, of the carbohydrates in the meal. You're going to have fewer sort of spikes and troughs of insulin and glucose. Your blood glucose and insulin is not doing this throughout the day. You get a much better control of it. So if you're getting your portions right, you've got enough plants, then start breaking down your meal and ask yourself, is there protein in this? Okay, and it can be plant-based protein, it can be animal-based protein, it doesn't matter. Is there some fiber, either from some good quality carbohydrates or vegetables or fruits? If there's plants, your fiber thing's ticked anyway. And then is there some fat in here, which, your protein might give you some of that, but is there some fat that's either from your nuts or seeds or oils or dairy or whatever the case is? Once that's done, you can also then start looking at the quality of each of these. But you can see how we progress from what was the most important to what's becoming less important, but it's still going to have an impact. So the choice of protein, am I making the best choice? Is it a little bit leaner? So maybe my saturated fat intake is down because my protein choice is really good. And a very high intake of saturated fats can increase your insulin sensitivity. My choice of fiber, where am I getting it from? Is it foods that are high in carbohydrate or low in carbohydrate? The lower carbohydrate ones might help you lose weight because you can control your energy a little bit better. And it's just going to increase your veg intake as well if you're choosing slightly lower carbohydrate versions. And then the fat that I'm adding to this, is it a healthful fat? Am I just throwing butter at a problem when I could maybe be doing some avo or nuts or seeds that aren't just giving me fat, but they're also giving me other nutrients as well. So you can break them down and maybe assess what each thing looks like. In this conversation as well around it, it's worth talking about carbohydrates. And one of the main approaches to improving insulin sensitivity and overcoming or reversing diabetes is going low carbohydrates. And there is some good evidence for it, because with reduced carbohydrates in the diet, your body's having to secrete less insulin because it's easier to manage. There's less of it floating around in your blood for it to store, so things start to reduce. On the extreme end of very low carbohydrate and even ketogenic diets, there does seem to be some impact, even acutely, in fasting insulin levels. So it is something that can be considered when we really want to treat the extreme level of it. For someone who's just got, a couple of things in mind that they want to improve blood glucose and slightly reduce the insulin, it's quite hard to go the full extreme of it. But when it's really indicated and we know that the risks are quite high, sometimes it's worth considering that. And then you have to do it pretty much under some supervision so that you're doing it properly. All right. Now we've got all of those ticked, we can ask ourselves about meal timing. Eating very regularly, one of the reasons I'm not a fan of it is because then your body's consistently having to metabolically get through the food that you're eating. So absorb it, digest it, get it metabolized into your cells. So it means that you're constantly having to do stuff. Whereas maybe something a little less regular is possibly better. There's no hard or fast rule for it. I just feel that more often we're eating, the more often we can go wrong. So if we can get a few meals that are better balanced through the day, it's maybe a little bit better and easier for us, provided that they're balanced and they're giving us our total daily needs. Interestingly, there's also some good evidence that fasting can improve insulin sensitivity. So some of the challenges I've done in the past with clients, and some of the times we work one-on-one with coaches, we might do sort of the occasional fast, teaching the body not only how to respond better to hunger, but it can improve that insulin sensitivity slightly. And particularly some forms of intermittent fasting, when our food window is in the morning, and when the body's better, I'll use the word primed, to use our food and absorb and digest carbohydrates based on your circadian rhythms, it seems to be quite effective. So again, it's something, if we've tried everything and we're still trying to improve our insulin sensitivity and our blood glucose levels, something we can look at is how are we eating within sort of the windows, how the body responds to it. Do we have enough gaps? Are we perhaps trialing some fasting to see what's happening, and going from there? Then a couple of supplements would be the last thing that I look at. Once we've gone through all of these aspects, you might weave them in with the row below it, but these last two are kind of the cherries on top to kind of facilitate it and play around with it once you've got all of your behaviors in check. But there are a few things here that can impact different aspects of how the body metabolizes and controls your blood glucose levels. So it might improve your sensitivity. So it means that the keyholes are the right size. Some of these supplements can help with that. Some of them might help your body produce more keys, so produce more insulin, or respond a little bit better to carbohydrate and blood glucose levels. Some that I'll mention, chromium, one that often comes up, and it does seem to improve insulin sensitivity and response to blood glucose levels. This and a few of the others that I'll mention as we go, it's normally where there's actually a deficiency. So if you've got normal levels and your diet's actually pretty good, or you've had a blood test to check some of these things, if your levels are fine, the chances that you supplement with them and see any difference in how your body manages glucose is going to be minimal. And zinc is a good example of that as well. So if there's a zinc deficiency, we can see poor blood glucose management, insulin response. Resveratrol, also one of them. So an antioxidant that often comes up in sort of cancer conversations, or when you're having a glass of red wine because it's a good source of it. Berries are good sources of them, can improve it. Vitamin K, one we maybe don't put enough attention into, but a deficiency of vitamin K, particularly in combination with vitamin D, we're learning more and more about how that can have a role to play in different things, and one of them is our blood glucose management. Curcumin, so the active compound in turmeric. You see all these golden lattes and turmeric coming around these days at high enough levels, so not necessarily from adding turmeric to your food, but in a supplemental dose, we do see some benefit of curcumin. Arginine, which is an amino acid, it can also improve your body's insulin sensitivity. And vitamin D, again, if there's a deficiency, we do respond a little bit better to blood glucose levels when we reverse a deficiency. So those are some worth just kind of keeping in mind. So when you're going through the journey of reducing your risk or managing it or monitoring what's going on, some of these things do become worth considering, either supplementing and every 4 months seeing how it changes your fasting levels of blood glucose and insulin to know what's actually working. I'd start at the bottom, work my way up through to the top, and hopefully get some success that way. All right. So in a nutshell, I think the having a good balanced diet, all the lifestyle elements, we know that we can control them. So let's control what we can. Pick the low-hanging fruit, a term I often use, which is the bit that you can focus on and think that you're going to get your biggest bang for buck. Hopefully this pyramid will guide you with some of those. And you can say, well, I know it's my portions and my total intake. After that, what am I doing next? And work your way down the line to make sure that we're doing the month. or during the month, if there are people who you think might benefit from it, give them a little bit of information. Send them across this way. Give them half an hour to listen to me talking a little bit about it. And any questions, comments, anything you want to know a little bit more, pop them down below or send them a DM, and we can chat more about it all. I hope you found that useful, guys. A good way to kind of kick off November. And nice being back in the hot seat with you. So thanks for swiping in. Everyone who said hello, and enjoy the rest of your day. Karen was here late, but better late than never. Pat, only a pleasure. Loving the science, plenty of info. So take what you need. Hopefully at least one thing that'll kind of get you thinking a little bit more. And that's what it's about. Guys, have a fabulous Friday. Enjoy your weekend. Join us tomorrow morning for our 8 o'clock again. And we keep going. Only about, 6 weeks till Christmas. Can you believe it? And make sure you're committing to your health and focusing on it this month. See what changes you can make to improve your blood glucose control. Until next time, see you guys all soon. Cheers.